Okay, so the objective of this session is to introduce you to the WSET systematic approach to tasting, which is often referred to as the SAT. I'm then going to show you how to use the SAT to assess a range of wines for their style, quality, and readiness for drinking. The assessment of wine is a skill that you will learn and develop through training and experience. So I would highly recommend that whilst you're doing the WSET course, that you apply the SAT to every wine that you taste. It's a skill that you'll find really important to help you break down a wine into its component parts, to be able to assess accurately its acidity, its tannin, its sweetness, its body, and its aroma and its flavour characteristics. A winemaker will assess wine to help them understand how their wine is balanced. Does it need more tannin? Perhaps it needs less acid or maybe more oak. A wine buyer working for a wine merchant will assess wine in order to make decisions as to whether a wine is a style their client is going to enjoy or whether it's at the right price. Having assessed a wine, a sommelier can make better decisions about food pairings. A member of staff in a wine shop can help customers decide whether a wine is a good fit for their taste. Assessing wine accurately is also a valuable skill for the wine enthusiast, empowering them to better understand wine and make their own food pairing decisions, or to simply understand whether it's a wine that they're going to enjoy drinking or not. The WSET have developed the SAT as a tool to help professionals and enthusiasts learn and develop the skill of assessing wine for its style and quality. I've selected some wines for us to taste together that represent a range of different styles, different qualities, different readiness for drinking. So by the end of this session, you will have a clear idea, or I hope you will have a clear idea of how to use the SAT in order to accurately assess the component parts of a wine. Okay, so let's take a look at Pinot Grigio. We're going to use the systematic approach to tasting to assess and evaluate Pinot Grigio for its component parts. The first thing that we look at will be the appearance. Okay, the clarity, the intensity, the colour, and then any other observations as necessary. There are two marks available for the appearance, one for intensity and one for colour. So whilst we ask you to note the clarity of a wine, you won't actually get a mark for it in the examination. Okay, so bear that in mind. Same with other observations as well. Good practice to notice if there's anything there that's worth mentioning, but you're not going to get a mark from it. So we'll always focus on the intensity and the colour because that's where the marks sit in the actual exam. So holding your glass at a 45-degree angle to a white surface, assess the intensity, how deep the colour is, and assess the colour, the actual nature of the hue of the wine. In this case, Pinot Grigio from Veneto, which is what this is, a fairly inexpensive, high-yielding style of wine from Italy, you should find that it's pale and that it's lemon in colour. Okay, pale and lemon. Lemon green suggests that there would be sort of like a coldness to the colour of the wine, perhaps a green tinge to the rim, and we've definitely not got that here. It's lemon, so pale lemon, and that will get you your 2 marks in the examination. Okay, let's move on to the nose. Okay, there are 7 marks available on the nose. 1 for intensity, 5 for aroma characteristics, and 1 for development. Okay, the first thing we always look at is the condition of the wine. Are there any faults? There aren't any in this particular wine, but also you're not going to get a mark for it anyway, but it's good practice to note that. This wine is clean and fruity, nothing like TCA or Brett in this particular wine. Have a look at the faults chapter in your textbook, and that will give you more information about the faults that you can expect in a wine. Okay, give the glass a good swirl. That tends to open up the aromas, makes it easier to identify what they are. I would suggest the intensity of this wine is light. Okay, you can't really smell the wine until you get it right up to your nose. If you could smell it about here, I'd suggest that it was a pronounced wine. But because we're not actually smelling anything until we've got it up to our nose, we're going to go with light. So that's 1 mark. Next, aroma characteristics, okay? You've got 5 marks here. Now, I would suggest that you write down primary, secondary and tertiary on your notepad and then start to assess the wines from there, because it's really important that you start to think about the aroma and flavour in your wine according to those 3 characteristics. Okay, primary characteristics come from the grape, they come from fermentation. They're usually the things like fruit, so strawberry, raspberry, lemon, orange, apple, pear as well. Secondary characteristics come from winemaking. These are things like the cream or the butter that you can get from malolactic fermentation, or the yeasty notes that you get from lees contact, or the oaky notes like vanilla and cinnamon and nutmeg that you get from oak maturation. Okay, so they're your secondary characteristics. Tertiary characteristics come from bottle age, honey, nut, leather, mushroom, wet leaves, for example, are the characteristics that you can expect from bottle age. So they're your tertiary characteristics. So get into the habit of writing primary, secondary and tertiary, and then deliberately looking for those 3 different characteristics in your wine. So this has only got primary. It's all fruity. There's no secondary notes. There are no tertiary notes in here at all. So it's all primary characteristics. So we're looking to write down 5 primary aroma characteristics to get us the marks here. It's difficult. This is, as I explained earlier, this is a high yielding Pinot Grigio from the Veneto area. It's inexpensive, so there's not a lot going on in here. So to find 5 aroma characteristics, you might struggle. The WSET recognises this, and so they're going to give you a mark for noting that it's simple. Okay, so first thing you do is write down simple. You're going to get the mark for that. Next, identify the fruit flavours. I would suggest that this is all green fruit and citrus fruit in here. You have to be more specific than that though. That's not going to get you the mark. So you have to say which green fruit, which citrus fruit you think it is. So apple, pear, they're going to get you 2 marks. Lemon, grapefruit, that's going to get you another 2 marks. So simple, green apple and pear notes with some citrus, grapefruit and lemon, that's going to get you your 5 marks for aroma characteristics. Okay, if you've got anything else to add to that, you're very welcome. The identification of aroma and flavour characteristics is very subjective, and we all have different taste experiences to bring at this stage. So get in touch with me if you want to clarify any of the aroma and flavour characteristics that you might be picking up in any of the wines that we taste during these video sessions. Okay, finally, for the nose, we have to make an assessment of the development of the wine. Is this a youthful, developing or fully developed wine? A youthful wine is going to have only primary fruit characteristics. A developing wine is going to show some tertiary characteristics. A fully developed wine is going to show a lot of tertiary characteristics, okay, because this is only primary characteristics, therefore we identify the wine as youthful. Don't forget this category, it's a valuable mark. Okay, so 7 marks available for the nose. That is 1 for the intensity, 5 for the aroma characteristics and 1 for the development. Okay, good. Let's move on to the palate. So take a mouthful, swirl the wine all around your mouth to make sure everywhere is coated and you get the full impact of the wine on your palate. First thing to comment on is the sweetness. No sugar in this wine, it is dry. Okay, so that's where your first mark comes from. The wine is dry. Secondly, comment on the acidity. How much did your mouth actually water? I would suggest not very much. When you're using the 5-part scale on the systematic approach to tasting, so for example, acidity, we can break it down into low, medium minus, medium, medium plus or high. That's a 5-part scale. Your default should be medium, and then you need to decide whether you think it's lower or whether you think it's higher. I would suggest that thinking along those lines, this is a bit lower than medium. So we're going to go medium minus. There's some acidity there, so we can't say that it's low, but it's not that marked. So I think we have to say that this is medium minus in its level of acidity. Okay. Then we move on to alcohol. This is a 3-part scale, so you've got the option of low, medium or high. No medium minus or medium plus, they're not acceptable. Low, medium or high is what you need to say here. Well, there's definitely some alcohol there, but it's not too hot. So I would say that this is medium level of alcohol. The body. Now, did it feel a bit watery? Did it feel a bit thin, or did it feel rich and creamy? So could you compare it to water, or is it better compared to cream, for example? I would say water, so we're going to go for light-bodied for this particular wine. Next up is flavour intensity. You might want to take a second mouthful at this time to remind yourself of those flavour characteristics, and we'll have a chat about it once I've taken that second mouthful. Okay, I would suggest the best approach to flavour characteristics is just to repeat what you had on the nose. You only get 3 marks here, so you only have to write 3 things down, but I'd advise writing more than the 5 for the aroma, more than the 3 for the flavour, just to be sure that you pick up those marks if you can. I know it's hard for a simple wine like this. So I would write down green apple, lemon and pear, or grapefruit as well, which is something that we picked up on the nose, and that will get you your 3 marks. I should comment on tannin, by the way. Whilst tannin is on the systematic approach to tasting, you're not going to get a mark for it on a white wine, because you'll be aware, I'm sure, that when you make a white wine, you remove the skins. You press the grape straight away, so you get very little skin contact, and it's in the skins where all the tannin sits. So there should be very little tannin, if any at all, in a white wine. So forget about the tannin, and that's noted in the marking scheme as well. You only get 9 marks for a white wine, whereas you get 10 marks for a red wine, because you need to comment on tannin for a red wine. Okay, so 9 marks. So again, I would do the same thing as you do with the aroma characteristics, is write primary, secondary and tertiary down on your taste notepad, and then put the aroma flavour characteristics next to it. So we've only got primary characteristics here. You just need the 3 of them. Comment on the fact that it's simple as well, because you'll get a mark for noting that it's simple. So simple, green apple and pear. Simple, green apple and lemon will do perfectly for this style of wine. Flavour intensity, I would say, was light as well. Okay, I don't think we covered that. Flavour intensity was light, and the finish, I would suggest, is fairly short. It disappears pretty quickly. It gives you a nice burst of fresh fruit flavour on the palate, but then it disappears pretty quickly after that. So we've got a short finish there, and that's your 9 marks. So dry, medium minus in acidity, medium alcohol, light body, light flavour intensity, green fruit, apple, pear and lemon, bit of citrus fruit in there as well. So apple, pear and lemon, simple, that'll get you another mark as well, the 3rd mark for your flavour characteristics, and then short on the finish. That gives you your 9 marks for the palate. Okay, now we've looked at the appearance, the nose, the palate, we can start to draw some conclusions about the wine. We can assess its level of quality, we can assess its readiness for drinking. So appearance, nose and palate deals with style. That helps us assess the style of the wine. Drawing conclusions by using that information, that evidence that we got on the nose and on the palate, we can then start to draw a conclusion about its quality and about its readiness for drinking. Okay, so in order to assess its quality, we have to consider the balance of the wine, we have to consider the length of the wine, we have to consider the intensity of the wine, and we have to consider the concentration, or the complexity of the wine. So its balance, its length, its intensity, its complexity. BLIC is a good mnemonic to remember here. Okay, balance, length, intensity, complexity. Okay, this wine is balanced. There's nothing out of balance. You could argue that it's a little bit thin on its fruit concentration, that there's not much flavour there at all, but it's still in balance and there's nothing there that jars. So we can say that this wine is balanced. However, it was fairly short. Okay, the flavour disappeared quite quickly. It wasn't particularly complex, and it didn't have much intensity. Okay, so it's missing quite a lot of what we would describe as a very good or an outstanding wine. Okay, so therefore we would describe this wine as acceptable. And the definition of an acceptable wine is on the screen now. Okay, and I think that fits perfectly the definition of an acceptable wine. In terms of its level for drinking, what a wine needs in order to support potential for bottle age and development of complexity in bottle are three things: tannin, acidity, and fruit concentration. Okay, so you don't really get tannin, of course, in a white wine, so we don't use that to look at the development of a white wine. So what we're looking for in this is acidity and fruit concentration. We haven't got either of those. Okay, so this is a simple, easy drinking wine that's designed for early consumption. Okay, so we can therefore say that this wine is drink now, not suitable for aging. Okay, that's where your mark will come. So for conclusion, you get 2 marks, one for identifying the quality and one for identifying whether the wine is ready for drinking or not. Okay. A word of advice, really helpful for the exam to come up with a mnemonic to help you remember every component part of the SAT. I do find that frustratingly students drop marks in the exam because they forget to mention something. Okay, so come up with a mnemonic that's going to help you to remember to comment on everything that you're going to get a mark for in this exam. For the palate, I would recommend stiff. Okay, so, sorry, not stiff, that's the one I use for spirits. Sat baff, okay, so sugar or sweetness, acidity, tannin, body, alcohol, flavour intensity, flavour characteristics, and finish. Sat baff, SATBAFF. Okay, to help you remember everything, and come up with a similar one for appearance, nose, conclusion as well, so that you grab all of those marks in the exam. So to give you a little bit of context about the Pinot Grigio, as I said earlier, this is a fairly simple wine. It's come from the Veneto, and it's made from a grape variety that's fairly neutral in character. In order to get any quality, any intensity, any complexity out of Pinot Grigio, it is possible, but you need to grow it in very specific sites where it gets lots of sunshine and can get lots of ripeness. It doesn't get this in the Veneto. It grows very well in the Veneto. It's warm and it's sunny, but they pick it early, they ferment it cold, they won't use anything like oak, and just put it in an inert vessel to ferment it and then bottle it straight away. The point is to make an easy drinking, early drinking style of wine, and the Veneto does that very well with Pinot Grigio. To get any more class out of Pinot Grigio, sometimes referred to as Pinot Gris if it's being grown in France, for example, then it needs to be grown on a very specific site. Yields kept low, lots of sunshine, long hang time so that it can develop lots of complexity in its flavours, which is what this Pinot Grigio has not been allowed to get. But still, it's a refreshing, easy drinking, light style of white wine that's actually going to be very versatile with a wide range of dishes and to serve on a wide range of occasions as well. Okay, I think that's the Pinot Grigio covered. If you have any questions, then you know where I am and how to get in touch with me. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at Gewürztraminer. So hopefully you've got some Gewürztraminer in your glass. This is, and it should be, an example from Alsace. Okay, at this stage we're just looking at a basic Vin d'Alsace. I know you can get Grand Cru Vineyard Gewürztraminers from Alsace as well, but at this stage I just want you to look at a very basic Vin d'Alsace example of Gewürztraminer, which you should have managed to get hold of. I just want to highlight one thing before we move on to the wine. For the WSET Level 3 Award in Wines examination, you will not be able to take your card, your SAT card, into the exam room with you. So you need to have this memorised as much as possible. Once you've tasted the 50 wines that I've highlighted as essential for the WSET Level 3 Award in Wines, the 50 wines from the syllabus that I've picked out for you to try, you should have a pretty good idea of how to use the systematic approach. So I would expect that you know it off by heart, but do make some effort to try and learn this card off by heart. Come up with a mnemonic or something that's going to help you remember it, because once you go into the exam, you cannot take this. And if you forget to write something down, you're simply not going to get the mark for it. Okay, so make sure that you have somehow learnt the systematic approach to tasting off by heart, because I don't want you to miss any of those valuable marks that you have in the examination. Okay, back to Gewürztraminer. Okay, so the first thing we do is we have a look at the appearance, and hopefully straight away you can see some depth of colour in this wine that perhaps you haven't seen in other samples. For example, compared to Pinot Grigio that we've tried during the course as well. It should be deeper, therefore we're going to go for medium intensity on this particular wine. And I think we can also say that this is golden in colour. Can you see that it's richer? It's richer than lemon, it's definitely richer than lemon green, so we need to go for gold on this one. And that doesn't surprise me. When you learn a little bit about Gewürztraminer and you realise that the skins are actually quite dark in colour, almost pink, even a tiny bit of skin contact, which you get as a naturally as a result of the wine sitting in the press, even just for a few hours sitting in the press, you get a little bit of extraction of colour into the juice, which creates this lovely golden colour in the wines. What else was I going to say about the appearance? I think that covers it. So that's our 2 marks. So remember, 2 marks for the appearance, to comment on the intensity and to comment on the actual nature of the colour itself. So let's have a look at the nose now. Okay, so remember, hold it by your chin. Can you smell it? I can't. I can't smell the sample at my chin. However, I can smell it here at my lips. It just about starts to snap into focus at my lips. So therefore I'm going to assign this wine medium plus. When I take it up to my nose, it's very, very strong. Okay, so I would say medium plus is probably a good level to describe the aroma on this particular wine. We would describe this as aromatic. It's very well defined, isn't it? You can clearly, unlike, for example, the Pinot Grigio, perhaps a Chablis as well, Chardonnay, you can clearly pick out some aromatic characteristics on this wine, which should make finding those 5 characteristics to describe the aroma fairly straightforward, fairly easy. Remember, write down primary, secondary and tertiary on your notepad and go from there. Primary characteristics, stone fruit, peach and apricot for sure on this wine. Floral characteristics as well, honeysuckle and rose. Think about Turkish Delight, which is rose scented. We're getting that characteristic too. And we've got some tropical fruit as well, lychee, classic. Look up the textbook description of Gewürztraminer and they will all say lychee in the text. Brilliant. We haven't got any secondary characteristics. Rarely do we use malolactic fermentation. Bit of lees contact, yes, but you don't get the same flavour characteristics that you might with Chardonnay, which we'll experience when we taste some Chardonnay wines. You don't get that in quite the same intensity. Yes, sometimes a little bit of oak, but usually it's old oak and it's more about oxidative creating oxidative flavours in the wine rather than actual oak flavours themselves. We'll come to that at a later stage. So I'm not expecting any spicy notes or toasty notes from the use of oak. So no secondary. Tertiary, well, it depends on the age of your sample of Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer produces some really lovely tertiary characteristics, usually honey, nutty notes like cashew or hazelnut as well, and spice like cinnamon and ginger. Having said that, mine is a fairly young example. It's only 2 or 3 years old. However, I am definitely getting a trace of honey. So I'm going to say honey. I'm going to put honey next to tertiary characteristics. And do you know what? I'm going to throw some ginger in there as well, stem ginger. So definitely a bit of ginger characteristics. So that gives us our tertiary characteristics in this particular wine. So yeah, about 3 years old, you'd expect to start to see some tertiary development in there. So that gives us our 5 characteristics for our 5 aroma characteristics, our 5 marks on the nose. Peach, apricot, honeysuckle, rose, lychee, honey, ginger are all words that you could use to help you describe the aromas here. Now, because we've identified some tertiary characteristics, we therefore have to say our wine is developing. Okay, easy. We've got tertiary characteristics, therefore we've got some development notes in there. So we say the wine is developing. We can't say it's fully developed because there's still lots of primary characteristics in there, so we're just at the developing stage at the moment. A fully developed wine is going to be dominant in those tertiary characteristics, and I will show you a wine that is dominant in tertiary characteristics. Okay, so we have 3 plus different aroma and flavour characteristics in this particular wine. We identified floral notes, we identified stone fruit notes, we identified tropical fruit notes, and we identified bottle development notes as well. So we have got 4 clusters. We've got some complexity therefore. Okay, so this is not a simple wine. This is showing some complexity, and we can use that later to help us determine the quality of this particular wine. Right, let's move on to the palate. So we'll taste this wine, swirl it around your mouth. Once you've spat it out, tell me or describe to yourself. Of course, you can tell me later, you know how to get hold of me. Describe to yourself the structure of the wine. Sweetness, acidity, body, alcohol. Okay. Okay, wow. Right, sweetness. There is definitely a degree of sweetness in this wine, okay? There is sufficient sugar, residual sugar in this wine, which suggests to me that there's some sweetness. Not a lot, however, so we're going to go with off-dry. It's only just out of the dry category, so we're going to go with off-dry on this particular wine. Just a note on sweetness, the winemaker can create sweetness in wine either by adding something called RCGM, reconstituted grape must, to the wine, or by arresting the fermentation. With a wine such as this, my bet is on the arresting of the fermentation. So the winemaker tastes the wine, decides when they're happy with the sweetness, and then arrests the fermentation by chilling the vat and adding a dose of sulfur dioxide. Okay, sometimes they might add a little bit of sweetening agent to the wine, but I don't expect that's the case in this particular wine. We'll come across some wines that have been sweetened with RCGM later in the course. Okay, but for now, let's have a think about the acidity as well. There wasn't a lot, was there? So I think we'll go with medium minus. It doesn't have that sort of bright, zingy, mouth-watering freshness that you would expect. So I think we're on medium minus with this particular wine for the level of acidity. Again, no tannin in this wine. Alcohol, medium, I reckon it's about 13.5%. If it was 14% or above, then we'd be looking at a high degree of alcohol. Okay, but I think this is at medium level. Gewürztraminer is capable of achieving high degrees of alcohol. above 14%, but this case it's still in the medium category. Okay, medium bodied as well. It's quite rich, isn't it? It's got a real lovely oily velvety texture to the wine, which is really rather charming. Okay, take another mouthful. This time we're going to look at the intensity, and we're going to look at the flavour characteristics, and we're going to think about the finish. How long do the flavours last in the mouth once you've swallowed or spat it out? Okay, medium plus intensity, I think we can go for on the palate here. Primary, repeat everything that you said on the nose. That is sometimes the best way of approaching this. Not necessarily going to find anything new. So maybe stick with what it was that you found on the nose. So we had peach, we had apricot, honeysuckle, rose and lychee were all characteristics that we used. No secondary, tertiary, again, there is definitely honey coming through now, definitely ginger coming through on the palate, much stronger on palate than it was on the nose. To be honest with you, I actually taste better with my palate than I do with my nose. So I often revisit all of the flavour characteristics on the palate, perhaps then write them down under aroma at the top, and then repeat them again on the flavour. It's just a way of approaching it. Do what works for you. As I say, over the course of 50 wines, I'm sure you'll find out what works for you and what doesn't. Okay, the finish. Well, I can still taste it even though I've been chatting away to the camera for a few minutes. So let's go with medium plus on the finish. Because the wine was okay, so that is our structure. They're our component parts of the wine: the appearance, the nose, the palate. Remember, 2 marks for the appearance, 7 marks for the nose, 9 marks for the palate, and then you get 2 marks for your conclusion, an assessment of quality and an assessment of readiness for drinking. Okay, let's have a look at quality. Use your mnemonic, blick, balance, length, intensity, complexity. Was there anything that was unbalanced about this wine? No. This wine is delicious. It's the way it's balanced perfectly for Gewürztraminer. I will concede it was perhaps a little low in acidity. I like that fresh zing that you get from acid in wine. Gewürztraminer doesn't have a huge amount of that, but that's natural for this particular style of wine, so we can expect that. Otherwise, it's perfectly balanced. It's certainly not fat and flabby at all, is it? Even though it hasn't got that acidity in there. The finish, we assess that as medium plus. That's really quite long for a wine, okay? So I appreciate it's not as long as perhaps higher quality wines would be. So therefore, we might naturally not mark this as outstanding. So medium plus finish on the length. The intensity, again, I think we said it was medium plus, both on the nose and on the palate. So we're quite high here with our level of intensity. Our complexity, well, we had 4 different clusters that we use to describe the aroma and flavour characteristics. So we've got a good degree of complexity in this wine. Again, not perhaps up in that outstanding category, but we are in the very good category. Okay, so the fact that the wine is balanced, it has a medium plus finish, it has medium plus intensity, and it has 3 plus clusters of aroma and flavour characteristics. We can assign it as very good. It is, again, I'm putting up the definition of the qualities on the screen now, and I hope you can see clearly the description of very good fits this particular wine. It is elegant, isn't it? It is showing some concentration, it has a long finish, and it is showing some complexity. So we can say that this is a very good wine as a result. And finally, the readiness for drinking is can drink now, but has potential for aging. Okay, so yes, it doesn't have a huge amount of acidity. Okay, so this isn't a 5-year plus kind of wine, but it is a maybe up to 5-year kind of wine where it will develop further tertiary characteristics in bottle, a little extra spice and dried fruit notes, which is going to add complexity to this wine, make it just that touch more interesting, and tell us a slightly longer story than perhaps it's telling us at the moment. I think that's a nice way of looking at the aging of a wine. Okay, so that's Gewürztraminer. Let me give you a little bit of context about the grape. Okay, so Gewürztraminer is found in Alsace. It's not grown in a huge amount of places around the world. It's not that popular with consumers, believe it or not. So it is a brave winemaker that dedicates space in the vineyard to the Gewürztraminer grape. However, one of the best places in the world for it is indeed in Alsace. And in Alsace, they also have Grand Cru sites that are suitable for production of very high quality Gewürztraminer indeed. It is very warm, it is very sunny in Alsace, and therefore grapes get to hang on the vine for a very, very long time and develop a very high degree of ripeness. With ripeness comes extra flavour, and that is what we're all looking for in our wines, is this high level of complexity, and they can achieve that in Alsace. Now this one is a mid-level, about £15 a bottle, I think, for this particular wine. So we're looking at a mid-level wine, and so therefore it occupies a moderate yielding site. It's not low yielding. There's no point in putting Gewürztraminer on a high yielding site at all and making inexpensive Gewürztraminer. There's just no point in that. But it's not occupied, it's not been harvested from one of the Grand Cru sites in Alsace either. It's definitely worth, if you can get hold of one, try a Grand Cru Gewürztraminer. There's something else. They really are quite special wines. In terms of winemaking, so the winemaker will use moderate fermentation temperatures. So they're not going for those really cool temperatures like you might find with Pinot Grigio, with some Chardonnays and Sauvignon Blancs, for example. So you don't get the pure fruity characters, you get the more sort of restrained fruit notes from the fermentation of Gewürztraminer. Sometimes they use old oak as well, large old oak, because they're looking for a slightly oxidative, savoury character in the winemaking, and it helps to add complexity. Fermentation arrested to give us that little bit of residual sugar, so the yeast hasn't quite converted all of that sugar into alcohol, and resulting in off-dry characteristics. Make sure you have a good look at the chapter on Alsace in your textbook to find out more information about Gewürztraminer and how it fits into the world of wine. Okay, good. Hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, so now we're going to look at Beaujolais Village. So hopefully you have got a sample of Beaujolais Village in your glass. Again, Beaujolais is a wine that you can get higher quality levels of. So you get 3 different quality levels of Beaujolais, 4 I suppose actually, if you count Beaujolais Nouveau, which we'll talk about separately. But basic Beaujolais, just straight Beaujolais written on the label, can be made from grapes that are sourced from anywhere within the Beaujolais region. Beaujolais Village, there are a certain number of villages within Beaujolais that are allowed to use the name, that are allowed to use the title Beaujolais Village if the grapes have been harvested from those particular village areas. And then you have Beaujolais Cru, where there are 10 villages in Beaujolais that are entitled to use the actual name of the village on their label. So for example, Fleury, Sainte-Maure, Côte de Bruy are all villages that are allowed to use the name of their village on the label. They don't have to state that it's Beaujolais. You'll find Beaujolais on there somewhere, but they don't have to use the term Beaujolais. They can just use the name of their village. As you move up the quality scale, you're going to find the wines that get more intense, more complex, more likely to use oak, and they're a different style of wine to those of the basic Beaujolais. But anyway, let's have a look at the basic Beaujolais just now. Okay, so again, first thing we do is we look at the appearance. Well, this is I would say this is medium depth, okay? Hold it over your SAT card and you can still just about see the writing underneath. So let's go with medium intensity for this particular wine. You might be struggling to read it, but you can still just about see it. So we've got medium intensity of our colour. And I would also suggest that we've got some purple highlights here. It's not ruby, it's not classic red colour, it's got some bright sort of purpley tones in the rim. So let's go for purple. So we've already got a clue here as to the development of the wine from the colour, because a red wine starts off life purple in colour, and as it gets older, that purpley colour changes to a garnet colour and then eventually changes to a brown colour. Okay, so a wine changes colour as it gets older. So if you see those purple highlights in the wine, it can give you a clue that the wine is probably going to be youthful. The fact that this wine is pale-ish in colour, it's not pale. We'll see paler examples of red wines, but it has a pale-ish colour. And one of the reasons for this is that Gamay, which is the grape variety that's used to make Beaujolais, has very low levels of pigment or anthocyanin in the skins. So it can produce wines that are quite pale in colour as a result. So even though it goes through skin contact, quite long periods of maceration, it can still be quite light in colour. Right. So that's our 2 marks on the appearance for intensity and for colour, and we're going for medium purple. Okay, move on to the nose. So let's have a look. What do we think? Yeah, I can get it just about there. So we're going to go with medium intensity on this wine. Medium intensity, good. And write down primary, secondary, tertiary. Okay, be really rigorous in doing that. Primary, secondary and tertiary. Next, primary, what are we going to write? Lots of things to say about this particular wine. Cherry, strawberry, raspberry. There's a little bit of white pepper in here as well. There's some cinnamon, spicy notes too. I'll tell you about where they come from in just a minute. Okay. No oak. No oak at all, and no tertiary characteristics either. Some cranberry and red currant as well. You can throw those in as well as your red fruit characteristics. Okay, so I wouldn't describe this as simple. It's not overly complex, but I wouldn't describe it as simple either. So I don't think simple is the appropriate terminology to use here, because we found quite a few bits and pieces in the nose. Okay, so development. We're youthful. We haven't got any tertiary characteristics in here, so it's all just youthful wine. Good. Okay, so we should have 7 marks available here. 1 for intensity, 5 for aroma characteristics, and 1 for development. Okay, right, let's move on to the palate. Okay, this is dry. I'll give you a bit of a clue, hint, I suppose. Almost all red wines are dry. There are a few examples of off-dry and medium dry red wines and even sweet red wines, but they are rare. Most of the wines that you're going to try on the level 3 are red wines that you try on the level 3 are going to be dry. Okay, what do you think of that acid? How much did your mouth water? Nice little bit of freshness there. Let's go with medium acidity for this particular wine. Tannins aren't particularly strong, what we'd expect from a grape that has quite low levels of anthocyanin, also has quite low levels of tannin as well. So I reckon we're on medium level of tannin for this particular wine. Tannin is that drying sensation that you should be picking up on your gums. You probably want to go like that, scrape it off. That's a medium level of tannin. Again, alcohol isn't noticeably hot, so we're at a medium level of alcohol here. And the weight wasn't particularly extraordinary. So I would have said, again, remember what I said for the other wines that we've tried. Medium should be your default, and then you decide to yourself, is it medium, or actually is it a little bit less than medium, or perhaps is it a little bit more than medium? That's how you decide whether to use medium minus or medium plus as a category. I think we'll stick with medium on this particular wine. In terms of its flavour intensity, go back to it, have another try if you need to. I think maybe we're on medium minus intensity. Yeah, let's go with medium minus intensity on that particular one. And again, it has a very, I would say fairly generic actually, red fruit flavour. So like we highlighted on the aroma, strawberries, cherries, raspberries, a touch of spice. Now let me mention about this spice. So cinnamon is a characteristic that you often notice in wines that have been treated to carbonic maceration. That's a technique that's widely used in Beaujolais and widely used in other wine regions as well that try to make light, fruity red wines. Okay, it makes the wine will be soft in tannins, and it will be very fruity by using this technique, carbonic maceration. Look that up in your textbook, have a good read up on what carbonic maceration is for more information on that one. In terms of finish, I think we've got a standard medium finish, maybe even medium minus finish. You have to be precise in your tasting note, so you can't put a range down, so choose between one or the other, medium minus or medium finish. When the examiner marks your paper, they can say it's borderline. It could be medium minus, it could be medium, so I'm going to give the mark for both of those. So if a candidate says medium minus, they get the mark. If a candidate says medium, they get the mark. But if they've said medium minus / medium, they're not going to get the mark. You have to be precise, you have to pick one or the other, but the examiner does have some flexibility to give the mark for the candidate who picked medium minus and the candidate who picked medium. Hope that makes sense. Okay. I think we've got a good quality wine here. It's balanced. There's nothing aggressive. The tannins aren't too high. They're not too low. The acid is nice and fresh, gives a nice crisp character to the wine. It's got good characteristics of fruit in there. It is a little bit generic, however, and not terribly complex. So therefore it just fits into the good category. It's a bit better than acceptable. It's got a little bit more drive. It's got characteristics that you would expect from a Beaujolais Village. So we're good with good quality in this particular wine. However, because of that low level of tannin, because of that low degree of concentration, we're going to go drink now, not suitable for aging. Just hasn't got quite enough structure to support it for any more than 1 or 2 years in the cellar. So let me give you a little bit of context about Beaujolais Village, made from a grape variety called Gamay. I told you that earlier. This region is noted for making light red wines that are typically unoaked, and as I said earlier, often made using carbonic maceration. In the cru villages, such as Fleury and Saint-Amour, then Gamay can produce wines of greater intensity and complexity. So just bear that in mind, and they are probably not going to use the carbonic maceration technique, and you will find them using oak in their wines as well. Vineyards in the Cru villages are just slightly better situated, so they get more sunshine, warmer conditions to ripen in, and the grapes will be left longer to harvest before autumn sets in, and so you'll get more complexity, more depth created in the wines as a result. Okay, that was Beaujolais Village. Okay, Bordeaux. So now we're going to look at Bordeaux. Hopefully you have an example with some age on it. The ideal age to be tasting Bordeaux really is sort of 8, 9, 10 years old, because what I want to show you at this particular stage is tertiary development. Okay, so we're looking for wine that has been in bottle for a good number of years and has developed some character, some extra complexity as a result. Not all wines age well in bottle. Bordeaux is particularly well known for it because of its high levels of tannin, because of its high levels of acidity, and because it tends to produce very concentrated wine. As a result of having been made from Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, the wines can reach high levels of concentration, which means that they age very well in bottle and develop this extra tertiary complexity that I really want to show you in this particular wine. So hopefully you've got something that has at least 8 years of age on it, 9, 10 if you're very fortunate to be able to get hold of samples with that much age on them. Okay, so let's have a look at the appearance. You should find this deep. Okay, Cabernet Sauvignon has very high levels of anthocyanin, very high levels of pigmentation in its skins, so it will always be quite deep in colour. You should also find, because this wine has been aged for some time, if you have an aged example of course, it is going to have a garnet hue. Okay, so we're looking at a garnet coloured wine in this particular case. So deep garnet is the colour that we're looking, the appearance that we're looking for in this particular wine. Okay, I can smell it here. Okay, before I get it anywhere near my nose, I can smell this wine. So we're going for pronounced on the nose. Okay, give the glass a swirl. Oh, okay, nice. So primary, secondary, tertiary, write that down, and then start assigning your aroma characteristics to those 3 categories of aroma. Blackcurrant, plum, blackberry, black cherry are all the primary aroma characteristics that I'm getting here. Secondary characteristics, clear secondary characteristics in this wine: cedar, oak, nutmeg, cinnamon on the nose. Okay, good. And then tertiary characteristics: leather. It's like a really good quality leather handbag. Cigar as well, cigar wrappers. Lovely. Fig, we've got some dried fruit in here as well, so fig, earth, farmyard are all notes that you could use to describe this particular wine. And I tell you what, I'm going to go with fully developed this time as well, because we've got so many tertiary characteristics. I think we're now on fully developed. The primary characteristics are taking a back seat, and it is the tertiary characteristics that are moving forward. So we'll describe this wine as fully developed. Good, right, let's taste. Okay, it's dry. Again, red wine, unlikely to be any residual sugar in the wine at all, so no sweetness on this particular wine, so dry, mouth watering. So we're going to go with medium plus acidity. Red wines don't hit the same heights that white wines do, so we'll stick with medium plus rather than high level of acidity. Tannins, they're quite big. Okay, so medium plus, I think maybe even high levels of tannin. Okay, so we're going to go for high tannin on this particular wine. Medium alcohol, it's not particularly hot, and it's medium bodied as well. Hang on. Medium plus body. Okay, we're going to go for medium plus body on this particular wine. Flavour intensity is pronounced. There's lots of flavour in this particular wine. Flavour characteristics, you can assign these in the same way that you did the aroma characteristics, so primary, secondary and tertiary. Make sure you note down all three. This is really important for this style of wine, that you pick out those primary, secondary and tertiary marks. The examiner will expect you to note at least one primary note, at least one secondary note, and at least one tertiary note, okay? So you get your 3 basic marks as a result of that. Your remaining 2 aroma characteristics can be distributed across primary, secondary or tertiary notes, but you'll have to have at least 1 primary, 1 secondary, 1 tertiary characteristic in order to get the marks, the full number of marks assigned to this particular wine. On the flavour, on the palate, again, the examiner wants you to note 1 primary, 1 secondary, 1 tertiary in order to get the full 3 marks. If you only note 2 primary, if you note, for example, 3 primary characteristics and then forget to write a secondary or a tertiary, you're only going to get 1 mark because there's only 1 mark available for primary characteristics. The other 2 marks were going to be assigned to a secondary and tertiary. Again, I hope that makes sense. I will write to you in a little bit more detail to explain that particular situation, just to make that positively clear. In terms of the finish, we're going with medium plus on this particular wine. I can still taste it now, so medium plus finish. Okay, so in terms of quality, we said this was pronounced in intensity. We said it had a medium plus finish. It's very complex because we've got more than 3, we've actually got 4 different aroma and flavour clusters that we've used here to describe this particular wine. So it's got quite a lot of complexity. I think we have to mark this as outstanding. And it doesn't surprise me. This particular wine cost around about £25. And I think and the fact that it's got this age on, it's developed this lovely complexity. So I think we have to describe this as outstanding. You will find that there are wines that are higher in quality than this as well, but we kind of have to draw our lines somewhere. And I think whilst I know that there are wines that are higher quality than this is also, it's a very nice wine. I don't think there's anything that we can do to criticise this wine. It's balanced, it's complex. Perhaps it's lacking a little bit of concentration that I might expect from some of the higher quality, perhaps a Grand Cru Classé from Bordeaux, for example, or perhaps some of the really high-end Napa Valley or Tuscan, Super Tuscan Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot blends that you can get as well. I know that Cabernet and Merlot can reach greater heights than this. However, this is pretty extraordinary in terms of this sort of style of wine. So let's mark this down as outstanding for this level wine. However, what I will say is that I think this is drink now, not suitable for further aging. I think it's reached the peak of its tertiary development. I think if we take it much further, we're going to lose some of that fresh fruit that we have in there. There's not much primary fruit in there as it is. So I think we should leave it there, and this is the sort of thing that should be drunk up now and enjoyed whilst it's got that nice balance of fresh fruit and tertiary fruit characteristics as well. So let's go for outstanding, and let's go for drink now, not suitable for further aging for this particular wine. Okay, so let me give you a bit of context about Bordeaux. I've given you quite a lot already. Do read up on the Bordeaux chapter in your textbook, but Bordeaux, most of the wines from Bordeaux, certainly those from the left bank, which is where this particular wine is from, wines from the left bank will be dominant in Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, and there are a number of different appellations within the Bordeaux region, some of which you will need to become familiar with. Pauillac is probably one of the most famous village appellations. Pomerol and Saint-Emilion are right bank appellations that you need to be familiar with. You've also, on the left bank, you've also got Margaux and Saint-Estèphe, and then you've got generic Bordeaux wines as well. So grapes can have been harvested from anywhere within the Bordeaux region and used to make a basic Bordeaux AOC, or AOP as they're called nowadays, if we're going to use the more up-to-date terminology. Okay, Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot on the right bank. Merlot dominates rather than Cabernet Sauvignon. In fact, there's hardly any Cabernet Sauvignon used on the right bank. It's all Merlot and then a little bit of Cabernet Franc as well. Wines in Bordeaux, certainly from the village appellations, will use oak, will use new oak, usually about 50% new oak as well. So that's cedar and cinnamon and nutmeg note are usually really dominant in the wines. And the wines age really well because they have a high level of acid, high level of tannin, high concentration of fruit, and they develop these lovely tertiary characteristics that we've already discussed, the cigar notes, the leather handbag notes, as well as the wine ages. So they're wines that are definitely worth holding on to for some time. Premium red wines. So learn your winemaking for premium red wines, and then you can apply the way a Bordeaux is made to the way that Cabernet Sauvignon wines are made around the rest of the world as well. They make the Cabernet Sauvignon exactly the same in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Italy, in Napa Valley in California. Okay, they will use very, very similar winemaking techniques whenever they make Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot wines. Okay, so you can apply the same technique that you have read about in your Bordeaux chapter. Sauterne. We're now going to look at Sauterne. Sauterne is, and the reason I want to show you this at this stage in the course is to demonstrate sweetness in wine. Everything that we've looked at so far has been dry. We've looked at some off-dry wines as well, but now I wanted to show you something that was sweet. Actually, it's even sweeter than sweet. I think we could possibly describe this particular one as luscious, but let's wait until we actually get to taste it on the palate. So Sauterne is a sweet white wine that comes from the Bordeaux region of France. Again, you will get to look up the theory of this in your book at some stage throughout the course. It is made using a process called noble rot. It benefits from infection from the fungus called Botrytis cinerea. Again, look it up in your book for more detail on that particular ones, but let's just concentrate on using the systematic approach to tasting to assess this wine for its structural components for the time being, and we can talk about the theory of how it is made another time. You will notice it's clear. Okay, again, we don't really talk about clarity too much. Most wines are clear and not hazy and don't have sediment. You might come across sediment from time to time, but it's nothing to worry about too much. You certainly weren't in the exam, and therefore you don't get a mark for mentioning clarity in the exam. So we're going to move straight on and look at the intensity. Now this is deep. For a white wine, I know you can still see through it, but on the white wine scale, this is deep in colour, and it is, I would say that this is amber Okay, we've actually got some orange tints in here, so we've moved away from gold and we've moved into amber, and we've got some orange tints. Okay, so we'll call it amber. Other observations, nothing worth mentioning, so we'll leave that one and move on to the nose. Now, I can taste it here. I can smell it, sorry, here. I hardly even have to pick it up off the table. I can smell it. So we're going to go for pronounced intensity. Okay. Aroma characteristics, primary, secondary, tertiary. Write it down. Hopefully you've got that by now. Next to primary, what are you going to go for here? Okay, it's actually not a huge amount of primary. Most of this is secondary and tertiary characteristics, which again is going to give you a clue about the development of this particular wine. However, looking on my lexicon, peach and apricot are definitely words that we can use here. Pineapple as well we can use to describe that wine. So we've got two clusters already, stone fruit and tropical fruit. Quince we can add in too. And in terms of citrus fruit, orange peel in here as well. Oh my gosh, we've already picked up loads of complexity before we've hardly even started. Okay, good. There's oak, we've got some vanilla, we've got cedar, we've got caramel, toast as well. Nice, all right, okay. But what we've got a lot of is bottle development and deliberate oxidation characters as well. We've got almond, I've already mentioned caramel, dried apricot, marmalade. We have got honey, lots of ginger, stem ginger, barley sugar actually, and that comes from the botrytis. So I know barley sugar isn't on the lexicon, but don't forget the lexicon is not meant to be exhaustive, so you can use other characteristics as well. I wouldn't necessarily advise it, particularly for the exam. Try and use what's on here because most examiners will be familiar with the aroma and flavour characteristics that are on this list. If you start using anything that's too wild, they won't know what you're talking about. So you need to stick really to what they've got on here. However, for your own purposes, and if you're writing or trying to be creative for a wine list perhaps, you can be a little bit more expressive if you like. So words like barley sugar, for example, if that means something to you, doesn't mean something to everybody. It was a sweet my grandfather used to give us when we were kids, so it means something to me, but it might not mean something to you in quite some way. Mushroom, okay. That's a result of the botrytis, you know, it's a fungus. So you get these mushroomy notes as a result of that fungal infection that is encouraged in this case for this particular wine. Okay, let's move on to the development. So we've got primary, secondary and tertiary characteristics here. So we've got a very complex wine in front of us. In terms of its development, again, I think we're perhaps fully developed with this wine. There's not so many of the primary characteristics left, so we'll go with fully developed. Okay, let's taste it. Okay, it's sweet. It's not luscious. It's not quite sweet enough to be luscious. Luscious would be something like a Pedro Jimenez, which you might come across later in the course, but this definitely isn't quite that sweet. So we're going to stick with sweet for this particular wine. Now, to give you a bit of context about sweetness, a dry wine like Chablis would have about 2 grams per litre residual sugar. This has about 125, 130 gram per litre sugar, typically. I don't know exactly this one, but it's about that. So you can see the difference in residual sugar for this particular wine. So that's where the sweet fits in. Right, I'm going to have to take another sip, but think about the acidity and the level of alcohol. Okay, acidity is balanced. It's not that high, so we're going to go for medium levels of acidity. a sweet wine made from Riesling. Again, for context, this is made from a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, which are the two white grapes that are used in Bordeaux. You'll read about those in your Bordeaux chapter a little bit later on. But if we were making a sweet wine from Riesling, for example, we'd find the acidity much higher. I apologise for my English, much higher than we do in this wine. So this is a medium level of acidity, but it's not so low that the wine is unbalanced. It's definitely still in balance. So medium acidity, no tannin because we don't have any skin contact. It's a white wine. Alcohol, medium. Okay, we're not above 14%. It doesn't feel warming on the back of the throat, and there's definitely some alcohol weight there. So we're definitely in the medium rather than low category. It's full-bodied, however, isn't it? It feels rich and creamy on the palate. We're not talking about a watery or thin wine here, so it is full-bodied. Okay, flavour intensity pronounced. Can't argue with that one. And the flavour characteristics, again, write down primary, secondary and tertiary and allocate those primary, secondary and tertiary notes. Again, the examiner is going to expect you to find a primary, a secondary and a tertiary note in order to assign you all 3 marks. If you only write 3 primary notes down, you're not going to get the marks. You're going to miss out on that secondary and tertiary mark. Those secondary and tertiary marks. And the finish is long. I can still taste it now. I don't need to go back for another mouthful, but I'm going to anyway. Okay, long finish. Pronounced. Well, very well balanced. Long finish. Pronounced intensity and very, very complex. We've got another outstanding wine in front of us here. Okay, so we have to put no question on this one. We put it in the outstanding category. However, I'm going to say can drink now, but has potential for aging. Okay, whilst it already has some age on it, I think it's got enough concentration that given another 5 years in bottle, it's going to develop even further delicious complexity. So I think we say can drink now, but has potential for aging for this particular wine. Okay, context around Sauternes. As I explained earlier, typically a blend of Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. Sometimes they use Muscadel as well to add a bit of floral characteristic to it. Semillon brings that richness, the body, the weight, whereas Sauvignon Blanc brings the fresh fruit character to the blend and adds that needed acidity to give the wine its balance. It's made with botrytis, so they allow Botrytis cinerea to infect the grapes. But because of the unique location of the Sauternes region, which is right next to a river, which is very fast flowing, you get this warm, you get this mixture of humid conditions in the morning, which allows the fungus to grow. And then in the afternoon, you get these warm, sunny conditions, which stops the fungus growing too quickly or moving too far through the vineyard. So the fungus develops at a nice, slow, managed pace. And what the fungus does is it causes the grapes to shrivel. So it pierces the skins, allowing water to evaporate. That concentrates the acid. It concentrates all the flavours in the grapes, and you get these and the grape starts to shrivel. I'll show you a picture. The grapes start to shrivel, and then the wines are harvested in several tries, what they call tries. Several attempts at harvesting in the vineyard, and they only pick the botrytis infected grapes. It doesn't happen consistently, unfortunately, so they have to pick berry by berry. Then they press and they produce these very lovely sweet wines. They put them in oak for a little bit of time as well, so you get some oak notes from some cedar notes and some spice notes from the use of new oak in the winery as well. And the wine develops very well in the cellar. So you will find these wines lasting for a very, very long time. Hope you found that as delicious and enjoyable as I did. I'm not going to not throw that sample away. I'm going to be drinking all of that one.